"Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside." The words, crisp and unmistakably final, cut through the low murmur of late-morning banking. The line behind him shuffled forward as Elijah Reed glanced up from the worn check he'd been holding for nearly 15 minutes. The teller's voice, Emily Davis, rang with the kind of professional cheer that could chill coffee. Elijah stood at the counter of the Newfield Bank and Trust's downtown branch, navy slacks pressed, light blue shirt open at the collar, and an old leather satchel slung over his shoulder. To anyone watching, he was just another customer, except maybe the only black man in the lobby that Tuesday. He offered a polite smile. "Is there a problem with the deposit?" Emily didn't return the smile. She glanced at the check again, turning it over, holding it up to the light as if it might morph into something else. She studied the signature, then Elijah's ID, then the check again. "There's nothing wrong with my ID," Elijah said softly, already aware of the script. This wasn't the first time. "I'm just following procedures, sir," Emily replied, louder now. "Do you have another form of identification? Maybe a work badge or a credit card with your name?" A hush swept through the marble lobby. The elderly man behind Elijah shifted his weight. A mother with 2 children shushed them as she watched, her eyes bouncing between the teller and Elijah. "Driver's license, debit card, passport if you'd like," Elijah said, sliding them across the counter. "That check is from the Federal Reserve, the branch on Constitution Avenue." Emily hesitated. "And you work for them?" Her eyebrow arched, tone suggesting a riddle with an obvious answer. "Yes," Elijah replied, his voice calm, almost practiced. She smiled tightly. "And what exactly is your position there?" He resisted the urge to sigh. "I'm a governor." A pause. A long one. Emily's lips parted, then pressed together again, her face working through several possible replies, none of them landing. "Let me get my manager," she said at last, standing up so abruptly her chair screeched across the tile. The rest of the line took another collective step forward, phones out now, some pretending to check texts, others recording. Elijah stood still, steady, the check and his identification arrayed on the counter between them. He could feel the heat on his neck, the eyes tracking every move. A security guard approached, Derek Hayes, tall, broad-shouldered, tie loosened at the collar. "Everything all right here, Miss Davis?" Emily turned her body, angling herself between Elijah and Derek. "I just need the manager, Derek. Standard procedure for large checks from out-of-state institutions." She didn't say federal, didn't say reserve, didn't say what everyone in the room could see, that she hadn't asked the white customer before Elijah for any extra ID at all. Derek nodded, but his eyes flicked to Elijah, reading the situation in one practiced sweep. "You good, sir?" Elijah gave a small nod. "Just waiting for Ms. Davis to clear my deposit." Derek moved off, but not far, keeping the interaction in his peripheral. A minute later, Scott Miller, the branch manager, appeared. He was in his late 40s with an expensive haircut and a cell phone clipped to his belt. He paused by the counter, eyes scanning the check, Elijah, then Emily. "What's going on, Emily?" Emily turned the check and IDs toward him, lowering her voice just enough that only Elijah and Scott could hear. "He says he's a governor at the Federal Reserve. This check is for $34,000. It's just unusual." Scott's eyes widened a fraction, but he composed himself quickly. "Mr. Reed, is that correct? You work at the Fed?" Elijah met his gaze directly. "Yes, sir. I'm a governor at the Board of Governors, Federal Reserve System." Scott smiled, one of those polite managerial smiles built to deflect blame. "Do you mind if we make a call to verify?" "Just a quick call. Security, you understand. Large checks, new clients." Elijah exhaled, subtle but enough. "You can call, but I opened this account last week, and I called in advance to confirm this deposit." Scott turned to Emily. "Why didn't you process the deposit?" Emily's jaw tightened. "His ID matches, but I wanted to confirm employment. We don't usually see these kinds of checks here." Scott gave a little nod. "Please wait here, Mr. Reed." He took the check and Elijah's ID and retreated to his glass-walled office. Behind Elijah, the line was growing. A man in a green windbreaker muttered under his breath. The mother with the children texted rapidly. A teenage girl by the window aimed her phone at the counter, the red recording light a tiny dot of accusation. Elijah checked his watch. 11:22 a.m., he was due at a board call at noon. His phone buzzed. A message from Dana Mitchell at CNN. "Can you confirm the 1 p.m. embargo? Major segment airing after." He texted back, "Confirmed. We'll be there." In the office, Scott was speaking on the phone. Emily had returned to her computer, eyes studiously on the monitor. Every few seconds, she looked up to see if Elijah had moved. He hadn't. After 7 minutes, Scott returned. He slid the check and Elijah's ID back across the counter. "I'm sorry, Mr. Reed. We can't accept this check today. There's an issue with the signature." Elijah's eyebrows lifted. "What issue?" Scott leaned in, lowering his voice. "It doesn't match the signature on file for the account, and we couldn't verify your employment with the Federal Reserve. The number you gave went to voicemail." Elijah's fingers curled around the check. "That's the main board's number. It's not a call center. There's a switchboard. Leave a message. They call back. The signature is from the Treasury liaison. It's standard." Scott shrugged. "I'm sorry, sir. If you'd like to file a complaint, you can speak with our customer advocate or take your business elsewhere. But we can't process this check." A buzz swept through the line. A woman in the back spoke up. "You just took a $20,000 cashier's check from me. No questions asked." Emily ignored her, focusing on her monitor. Elijah's voice didn't rise. "Would you like to call the number on the Federal Reserve website, Mr. Miller?" Scott's smile turned chilly. "Sir, we have procedures. If you're dissatisfied, you can escalate. But at this point, I'll have to ask you to step aside and let the next customer through." Elijah paused, considering. He nodded slowly, collected his ID, and stepped aside, but didn't leave the lobby. He pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, and started recording a voice memo. "Tuesday, 11:32 a.m., Newfield Bank and Trust. Check refused. ID and employer not accepted. Teller, Emily Davis. Manager, Scott Miller." The teenager by the window, her name was Lindsay, posted a clip to TikTok. "Guy in a suit just got denied at the bank for a gov check. Her Newfield Bank, Chartered WTF. Within 5 minutes, it was already climbing in views. The lobby continued to bustle, but tension hung in the air. The man in the windbreaker stepped up. "Can you cash this for me?" He slid a check across. Emily didn't ask for extra ID. She smiled, stamped it, handed him his cash. Derek, the security guard, caught Elijah's eye. He raised an eyebrow as if to say, "Want me to step in?" Elijah shook his head. Scott emerged from his office waving a slip of paper. "Sir, I need you to leave the premises. You're disrupting business." Elijah stayed calm. "I'm not making a scene. I just want to understand why my check was refused." Scott's smile was tight. "We've already explained, sir. If you refuse to leave, we'll have to call the police." A woman near the back spoke up. "Why are you calling the police? He's just trying to deposit a check." Scott glared. "Ma'am, please mind your own business." Elijah pressed record on his phone. "Manager is threatening to call the police for attempting a legal deposit. All documentation provided." Someone in the line muttered, "This is ridiculous." Another, "Racist as hell." Elijah made eye contact with the woman who'd spoken up. She mouthed, "I'm recording." Her name was LaToya Freeman. She'd seen enough of these moments to know when to save the video. Derek stepped forward again, lowering his voice so only Elijah could hear. "You want to just step outside and cool off? I don't want to see you get arrested over this." Elijah nodded. "I appreciate it, but I haven't broken any rules." A minute later, 2 police officers arrived, called by Scott. The taller one, Officer Wilson, approached Elijah. "Sir, we've had a report that you're trespassing and disrupting business." Elijah handed over his ID, calm as ever. "I'm not trespassing. I'm a customer. I tried to deposit a check. They refused. I'm just documenting the experience." Wilson looked over the ID, checked the check, and glanced at Elijah's phone. His partner, Officer Pratt, checked with Scott. "He refused to leave when asked," Scott said, voice raised for the lobby to hear. Wilson eyed Scott. "You want him arrested for trying to deposit a check?" Scott reddened. "He's refusing to leave." Pratt returned to Elijah. "Sir, they're asking you to leave. You need to comply or we'll have to escort you out." Elijah nodded, quietly gathered his things. I'll go, but I will be filing a formal complaint with your corporate office and with the Federal Reserve's Office of Minority and Women Inclusion. Scott's smile faded. He'd heard of that office. LaToya, still recording, followed Elijah out. You okay? She asked. He nodded. I'm used to it. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was an alert from Twitter, his name, tagged by the TikTok video. Inside the bank, the atmosphere shifted. Emily wiped her hands on her skirt. I was just following policy, she whispered. Scott didn't reply. He was staring at his computer, already pulling up the customer file for Elijah Reed. Outside, Elijah made another call, this one to the Office of Minority and Women Inclusion. I'd like to report an incident of discrimination at Newfield Bank and Trust. My name is Elijah Reed. Yes, I'm a Federal Reserve governor. I have documentation. I have witnesses. LaToya posted her video to Facebook and Instagram. This is how they treat you at Newfield Bank and Trust. The Federal Reserve governor denied deposit. Watch the whole thing. Banking while black ensures discrimination. Within an hour, it had been shared by a dozen local community pages. Elijah walked 2 blocks to the regional Federal Reserve office. The security guards at the entrance recognized him, waving him through. Inside, he met with the public affairs director, Dana, who listened to his story. We've seen these issues before, Dana said quietly, but not to a sitting governor. Elijah nodded. I'm not interested in personal apologies. I want systemic accountability. Dana's eyes glinted. We'll handle it. She handed him a folder. CNN reached out again. They want to run the feature today. Your call time is 3:30. Elijah checked his phone. The video was already at 27,000 views. Across town, the local CBS affiliate, tipped by LaToya's Instagram, sent a camera crew to the bank for comment. Emily refused to speak on camera, but Scott delivered a statement at the branch door. We take discrimination allegations seriously. Our team follows standard procedures for all large transactions. We are cooperating fully with authorities. Lindsay, the teenager from the lobby, posted an update to TikTok. Now there's a news van outside. The guy from earlier is trending. Newfield Bank, the viral. The story was growing by the hour. At 12:30, Elijah joined a Federal Reserve video conference. He didn't mention the bank, but Dana pinged him mid-call. Bank video at 100K views. Social media wants your response. He typed back. Let's hold until after CNN. On Twitter, the hashtags banking while black, Elijah Reed, and Newfield Bank trended regionally. Back at the branch, Emily called her mother on her break. Mom, I just did what we're supposed to. They said he was a Federal Reserve governor, but how was I supposed to know? He looked ordinary, not like a VIP. Her mother's voice was muffled, anxious. Be careful what you say, honey. This could blow up. Scott was on the phone with legal. You need to get ahead of this, Scott. That video looks bad, the lawyer said. This is the kind of thing that brings in the feds, or worse, cable news. Derek, the security guard, scrolled through his own phone in the break room. He found himself in 3 different TikTok clips, standing behind Elijah. He shook his head, knowing what would come next. At 1:15, a producer at CNN dialed Dana. We want Elijah live for a reaction segment. Our anchor, Dana Mitchell, will take the lead. We'll loop in a financial analyst. Can he go on camera? Dana confirmed. He'll do it from his office. Give us the link. Word was spreading in Washington, too. Robert Stanton, Federal Reserve Chair, emailed Elijah. Heard about the incident. If you want me to make a call, let me know. We're behind you. Elijah replied, Thanks, Robert. Let's let this play out. I want the process visible. At 2:45, CNN began teasing their segment. Coming up at 4 p.m., a shocking incident involving the youngest Federal Reserve governor ever appointed. Our exclusive interview. Don't miss it. In Newfield, outside the branch, a small crowd gathered. Some waved signs. One read, Bank Fairness Now. Another, Justice for Elijah. Local activist groups had mobilized, LaToya at the center, rallying support. Inside, Emily watched from behind the teller glass. Should we close early? She asked Scott. We can't. Scott replied. Just stay professional. Don't say anything. Legal's working on a statement. At 3:15, the bank's national PR office released a statement. Newfield Bank and Trust is committed to equal treatment for all customers. We are aware of the situation involving Mr. Elijah Reed and are conducting a full investigation. On Twitter, financial journalists began weighing in. A Wall Street Tasha. If the allegations are true, this is a textbook case of bias in retail banking. Will the Fed respond? Econ Watchdog. Remember the name Elijah Reed. This could change industry rules. As 4 p.m. approached, Elijah sat in his office, camera on, suit jacket pressed, tie perfectly knotted. On his desk, the check, still uncashed, next to his phone, which was buzzing nonstop. Dana Mitchell introduced the segment. A Federal Reserve governor denied a deposit at a local bank. Is this a case of mistaken identity or something more serious? Joining us now, Governor Elijah Reed, the youngest to ever serve on the Board of Governors. Elijah answered every question, calm and clear. I followed every procedure. I provided all documentation. I was denied not because of policy, but because I didn't look like what they expected a Federal Reserve governor to look like. Dana pressed. Do you think this was racial bias? Elijah didn't flinch. I know it was. The video speaks for itself. The clip of the incident rolled. The screen split between the bank lobby and Elijah's poised expression. By 4:15, CNN's social media accounts had posted the video. It was trending worldwide within the hour. At Newfield Bank and Trust, Scott Miller's office phone rang over and over. Corporate was calling, legal was calling, reporters were calling. Emily stared at her monitor, blinking away tears. Derek watched from the break room, shaking his head. Outside, the crowd grew. Local news stations rolled up. LaToya was interviewed, her Facebook video at 500,000 views and counting. By 5:30 p.m., the first calls for accountability came in. Community leaders, local officials, even a statement from the mayor. Discrimination has no place in our city. We will ensure Mr. Reed receives justice. Elijah returned home that evening to find his parents, Denise and Harold Reed, sitting in the living room watching the CNN segment on TV. Denise wiped her eyes. We always told you to keep your head up. You did that today, baby. Harold, never one for many words, nodded. Proud of you, son. Proud of how you handled yourself. Elijah smiled, exhaustion finally showing. He checked his phone one last time, the trending bar still lit up with his name. He looked up at his parents. This isn't just about me. It's about everyone who gets told they don't belong. I'm going to see this through. The night fell, the city buzzed, but the story was only beginning. Morning light cut sharply through the tall windows of Elijah Reed's apartment, bouncing off the glass-framed certificates that lined the walls of his study. The air was heavy with the buzz of alerts. His phone vibrated on the nightstand. Then again. Then again. By the time he'd made coffee, his inbox overflowed with requests, interview offers, messages of support, threats, questions from board members, and a dozen urgent emails from Newfield Bank's executive office, all flagged important. But even as Elijah tried to piece together a normal morning, he understood normal was gone. CNN's video had racked up over 2 million views overnight. Hashtags bearing his name and Bank's banking while black trended nationally. On Twitter, politicians, activists, and industry leaders debated the incident, some demanding answers, others accusing Elijah of playing the victim, still others digging up details about his background, trying to fit him into a pre-written narrative. He sipped his coffee and opened a text from LaToya Freeman, the customer advocate and witness. Standing with you, brother. If you need anything, you have my number. We're not letting this go. Elijah replied, Thank you. Stay safe. You might get calls. The phone rang. His mother, Denise. Her voice was calm but insistent, the voice of a woman who'd navigated every hard corner of the world for her children. Elijah, you sure you want to keep doing interviews? Not everyone's happy. I saw those nasty messages on the local news comments. He smiled softly. I know, Mom, but if I don't, they'll write the story for me. She didn't argue. She just said, I love you. Your father says you should call him if you need anything. You know how he is." He could hear Harold's voice grumble in the background, something about standing tall. Elijah promised he would call. Across town, Newfield Bank's corporate office was in full crisis mode. Scott Miller, the branch manager, had been called into an early morning video meeting with senior leadership. He sat stiffly at a borrowed desk, suit jacket tight, jaw clenched. On the screen, Greg Martin, the chief risk officer, did not mince words. "You're telling me you refused a check from a Federal Reserve governor, then called the police on him? With a full lobby and half of them recording?" Scott tried to explain. "It wasn't personal. Emily followed procedure. I supported her. His ID didn't match the signature on file. We couldn't reach the Fed." Greg cut him off. "The ID matched. We have the file. There was no reason to escalate." Janet Green, the head of compliance, added, "You didn't just escalate. You made national news. We have 3 civil rights organizations calling for a federal investigation, and the mayor's office wants a meeting. Elijah Reed is not only a Federal Reserve governor, he's the youngest one in history. You had a perfect storm and you didn't even see it coming." Scott's mouth opened, then shut. He knew it was pointless. They weren't looking for an explanation, they wanted a scapegoat. Downstairs, Emily Davis, the teller, sat at her own desk, hands shaking as she read through a flood of emails, some supportive, most scathing. "How could you do that?" one read. "You're what's wrong with America." "Fired yet?" another said. Some called her a racist, others said she was just a pawn. None made her feel any better. Her mother called again. This time Emily didn't answer. She stared at her reflection in the computer screen, searching for some version of herself she recognized. "I just followed the rules," she whispered, as if the words could insulate her from the growing storm. Outside the branch, a crowd gathered, small at first, then swelling as news vans pulled up, satellite dishes rising, microphones pointed. Local activist groups handed out flyers demanding justice for Elijah and accountability from Newfield Bank. Chants rose in waves. "Banking should be fair. No more profiling," their voices echoing off the glass. LaToya Freeman was there, calm and resolute, giving interviews. "This isn't new. This happens every day in banks all across America. Elijah Reed has a title. Most of us don't. What about the ones who never go viral?" Inside, Derek Hayes watched from behind the glass doors, arms folded. He'd been instructed not to speak to the press. He didn't need to. They all knew he'd tried to de-escalate, that he'd watched this play out 100 times before, just never with cameras. Back at the Federal Reserve's regional office, Elijah prepped for a day of meetings. He met with Dana from Public Affairs and 3 lawyers. They outlined possible outcomes, all the ways this could unfold. "The bank will likely offer you a private settlement," one lawyer explained. "An apology, perhaps an NDA, maybe some money. But given your position, this is bigger than you. It's a public policy issue now." Dana added, "CNN wants a follow-up. CBS, NBC, and even NPR have called. The Post is running an op-ed. The administration is watching." Elijah nodded. "I'm not interested in a settlement. I want real policy change. This can't just be about one check and one man." Dana grinned, the grin of someone who'd been waiting for this moment. Let's make sure they know it. That morning, Newfield Bank's CEO, Philip Bradford, made a statement on national television. "We are deeply troubled by the incident involving Governor Elijah Reed. We have initiated an independent investigation and are reviewing our procedures to ensure fairness and equity for all customers. Discrimination has no place at Newfield Bank." The anchor pressed him. "Will there be terminations?" Bradford dodged. "We won't hesitate to take action if our policies were violated, but we need to let the investigation run its course." Within minutes, social media responded. Translation: nothing will happen. Same old song and dance. Civil rights attorney Shonda Riley went live on Facebook, denouncing the bank's pattern of systemic discrimination. She referenced a pending class action lawsuit, hinting Elijah's case might be a tipping point. Elijah read every headline but responded to none. He spent the morning in meetings, quietly observing, taking notes, cataloging every response for a future he knew was coming. At noon, a call came from the office of the Comptroller of the Currency. The federal government had opened a formal inquiry. "We'd like your full statement, Mr. Reed. We're gathering evidence for a broader review." Elijah agreed. "But I want the investigation to go public. People need to see how these systems work, not just the outcomes." By early afternoon, more than 50 news stories had been published, dissecting the incident from every angle. Commentators pointed out the contrast, how a black man in a suit with a Federal Reserve badge could still be doubted, dismissed, even threatened with arrest for trying to deposit a check. Other stories emerged. Black and brown customers from across the country began sharing their own banking discrimination stories on social media, tagging Elijah, Latoya, and Newfield Bank. Each story added momentum. The snowball was rolling, and it wasn't stopping. The Federal Reserve Board called an emergency meeting. Elijah joined by video, his face framed by the ornate molding of his study. Robert Stanton, the chair, spoke first. "Elijah, you have the full support of the board. We're reviewing our partnerships with Newfield Bank and others. This is going to have repercussions." A senior governor, Thomas Barrett, added, "We'd like you to help draft a public response, a set of policy recommendations for the banking industry, if you're willing." Elijah agreed, knowing it would mean more exposure, more backlash, but also real change. "It's not just about me," he said. "It's about fixing a system that assumes black people can't be trusted, no matter what's in their wallet or on their badge." The board drafted a statement. "We stand with Governor Reed and all Americans who deserve equal treatment in financial institutions. We will work with regulatory agencies and community advocates to ensure justice and systemic change." The statement was published within the hour, setting off another wave of headlines. At Newfield Bank, Scott Miller was called into yet another meeting, this one with human resources, legal, and corporate communications. The questions were pointed. Did you follow policy? Did you consider the optics? Did you ask for additional documentation from every customer or just Mr. Reed? Scott's answers faltered. He'd lost track of which version of the story he was telling. Emily Davis was interviewed by HR separately, her hands trembling, her voice tight. "I didn't mean to single him out. I just thought, I didn't think someone like him would have a check like that." Legal took notes. "You understand why that's a problem, right?" Emily's eyes filled with tears. "I do now. I'm sorry." In the break room, Derek watched a live stream on his phone. Protesters filled the lobby, chanting, holding signs. Management had locked the doors, but the cameras pressed in, broadcasting every word to a national audience. Outside, Latoya addressed the crowd, her voice carrying. "We're here for every person who's ever been told no for no reason at all. We want policies, not just apologies." Back at Elijah's apartment, his phone rang again. This time it was Jessica Morgan, the local news reporter. "Elijah, can you comment on the growing protests? Are you planning to take legal action?" He responded, "I'm not suing for money. I want real transparency. I want to see this bank and others make concrete commitments, anonymous reporting, bias training, real accountability." Jessica nodded, taking notes. "Can I quote you?" "Please do." At 3 p.m., the city's mayor released a statement calling on Newfield Bank to commit to a full overhaul of its customer service protocols and offering to host a community town hall. By 4 p.m., CNN aired another segment. Dana Mitchell, the anchor, spoke to Latoya Live. "Latoya Freeman, you witnessed the incident. What was your impression?" Latoya was steady. He was polite, professional, and completely within his rights. The bank staff didn't just doubt his check, they doubted him. That's what so many of us deal with every day. Dana followed up. "Do you think this incident will change anything?" Latoya looked straight at the camera. "Only if we make it. Only if banks, regulators, and communities work together to end these patterns. And only if people like Elijah refuse to accept silence." The segment cut to an interview with Shonda Riley, the attorney. "We're preparing to file a federal complaint. This isn't about one bank, it's about an industry that's failed to change. Governor Reed's story is just the latest example." In the comments section, the debate raged. Some viewers cheered, some jeered, but all watched. By evening, the story made international headlines. The Guardian ran a piece. America's youngest central banker denied service, what it reveals about race and trust in finance. Le Monde profiled Elijah as the face of modern America's unfinished business. At the branch, management posted a note on the door. Due to unforeseen circumstances, this location will close at 5 p.m. today. Inside, Emily packed her purse, hands shaking. She wondered if she'd be fired, or worse, branded forever as the face of something she didn't fully understand. Scott waited in his office, door locked, the red light on his phone blinking non-stop. He scrolled through the emails. Step down. Resign. We support you. You've destroyed our reputation. He considered calling his wife, but what could he say? That he'd done his job and now it was costing him everything? Outside, the crowd lingered, even as the sun dipped below the skyline. Activists handed out water, passed clipboards for signatures, registered new voters. LaToya moved through the throng, answering questions, calming nerves. At 7 p.m., Elijah dialed into a private call with the Office of the Comptroller. They outlined the process. We will be conducting interviews, reviewing video evidence, and examining the bank's compliance policies. Do you have any immediate demands? Elijah was ready. First, public acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Second, anonymous reporting for customers and employees. Third, mandatory anti-bias training for all staff, including management. Fourth, quarterly transparency reports published to the public. The official on the line took notes. You'll be updated as the investigation proceeds. Thank you for your cooperation, Governor Reed. After the call, Elijah sat back, exhaustion radiating through his shoulders. The fight was far from over, but for the first time since yesterday, he felt something like hope. His phone rang. It was Dana, the public affairs director at the Fed. Elijah, I'm proud of how you're handling this. The board is with you. Our press team is fielding non-stop calls, but we're staying on message. He thanked her. This has to be bigger than me, Dana. It has to change the system. She agreed. We're already seeing banks review their policies. Industry groups are watching. You're making an impact. Late that night, Elijah took a walk through his neighborhood. The city felt changed. Strangers recognized him. Some nodded. Some offered fist bumps. A few stopped to say thank you. One woman, a teacher named Carla, said, "My kids watched you on TV. They couldn't believe someone at your level could still be treated that way. You're teaching them more than a classroom ever could." He thanked her, feeling the weight and promise of the moment. At home, Denise and Harold called. This time, Harold spoke first. "You did the right thing, son. You didn't lose your cool. You spoke the truth. That's how change happens." Elijah smiled. "Thanks, Dad. I learned from you," Denise added. "Just promise us you'll take care of yourself. The world isn't always kind to black men who speak up," he promised, knowing he would keep going. As midnight approached, Elijah sat at his desk, phone in hand. The notifications kept coming. Stories, calls, emails, posts. He closed his eyes, breathed deep, and pressed record. Wednesday, 12:03 a.m. The fight continues. Not for me alone, but for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong. Tomorrow we move forward. Across the city, the last of the protesters went home. The news vans rolled away. But in living rooms, on social feeds, in the halls of banks and boardrooms, the conversation was only growing. The system, long unyielding, had been forced to look at itself, and in that mirror saw the face of a man who refused to be doubted, dismissed, or denied. The story was just beginning. Thursday began with headlines, not sunrise. CNN, banks bias caught on tape. How a Federal Reserve governor changed banking forever. NPR, Elijah Reed's Stand Forces Reckoning in U.S. Banking Industry. USJ. Banks scramble to address racial bias after viral incident. By dawn, Dark Elijah Reed and Dark Banking While Black trended globally. Editorials dissected every angle. Radio hosts debated policy, and morning shows replayed Elijah's calm voice over lobby security footage. For the first time, banks everywhere were in the hot seat. Elijah barely slept. At 6:30 a.m. he was already dressed, fielding calls from officials, activists, board members, and a rotating list of press. Coffee in hand, he paced his kitchen, phone pressed to his ear. Dana, the Federal Reserve's public affairs director, sounded both exhilarated and exhausted. Elijah, it's bigger than we thought. Banks from New York to San Francisco are reviewing customer protocols. 3 senators called already. The NAACP wants you to headline their conference. He exhaled, then forced a wry smile. Let's get through today first. Dana's voice softened. You did this the right way. The world is watching. His father, Harold, texted, Stay sharp, son, they'll try to spin it. His mother, Denise, texted seconds later, Proud of you, be safe. Elijah's day started with a call from Robert Stanton, Federal Reserve Chair. The two had always had a respectful rapport, but today, Robert's tone was different, urgent, almost parental. Elijah, you'll be leading the working group. We want a national task force, Fed, OCC, NAACP, consumer advocates. I want real recommendations, not PR fluff. Elijah agreed. We'll need public hearings, testimony from ordinary people. That's exactly why you're the youngest governor, Stanton said. You see what the rest of us miss. Full authority, whatever you need. Newfield Bank and Trust's boardroom was chaos. The bank's CEO, Philip Bradford, sat at the head of a glass table as board members, lawyers, and PR strategists argued over Zoom and in person. We need a full mea culpa, no spin, no delay, said Lindsay Porter, head of communications. We fire Scott and Emily and make it clear this was local, not systemic, snapped another board member. Porter countered, If you do that, you throw them under the bus and everyone else gets off scot-free. We need real change, not just a scapegoat. Bradford pinched the bridge of his nose. Get me a draft apology, but start compliance reviews on every branch. I want numbers, how often are we flagging checks and whose? Get me breakdowns by race, zip code, and account type. A junior analyst, her hands shaking, read out the early numbers. Since 2018, non-white customers at downtown branches have been 3 times as likely to have checks flagged or refused. Complaints are up 36% in the past year. No one in the room was surprised. They just weren't used to saying it out loud. By mid-morning, Newfield's legal team reached out to Elijah directly, offering to meet, apologize, and explore any possible terms of reconciliation. He declined publicly. His tweet read, This isn't about apologies, it's about system accountability. Private settlements change nothing. My experience is public, so is my demand for change. The tweet was shared over 70,000 times in 2 hours. Downtown, protesters gathered outside Newfield's flagship branch. More than 300 people packed the sidewalk, signs aloft, chanting for equity, real change, and justice for Elijah Reed. Latoya Freeman was there, organizing water, snacks, and first aid stations for the crowd. Reporters gathered around her. What are you demanding? One asked. Latoya replied, No more papering over racism. We want Newfield and every bank in this city to track bias, publish their numbers, and be held accountable. Anonymous reporting, restitution for those denied service, and a seat at the table for our communities. On the steps, Elijah's face smiled from hand-printed posters. Respect is not an option. It's a right. One sign read, Would you question a white man's check like that? Another, Our money is green too. Banks in other cities took notice. By noon, at least 5 regional banks had quietly contacted civil rights leaders, hoping to discuss best practices and get ahead of the PR storm. Elijah's inbox overflowed with requests to advise, consult, and speak. He responded to only one, a private message from a woman in Texas who wrote, My son saw you on TV and said, That could be me one day. Thank you for showing him how to hold his ground. At Newfield Bank's HR office, Scott Miller sat through his disciplinary hearing. The process was swift and merciless. The HR director read from a report. You escalated a situation unnecessarily. You failed to verify policy and instead relied on subjective judgment. You called police on a black customer whose credentials were in order. Scott tried to defend himself. We're trained to watch for fraud. These checks, sometimes. Not like this, the HR director cut in. You're suspended pending further review. Scott left the office through the back door. He avoided the cameras, but nothing could stop the flood of messages, his email, social media, even his personal phone. Some threatened violence, others offered support. Most just demanded answers. Emily Davis, the teller, was given paid leave pending investigation. She spent the day scrolling through news, crying, apologizing to family members, and reliving every detail of the encounter in her mind. She tried to reach out to Elijah, but his public email was full, his voicemail box over capacity. Derek Hayes, the security guard, was interviewed by Internal Affairs. Did Mr. Reed act threatening? No. Did he comply with all requests? Yes. Would you have treated him differently if he'd been white? No, but the bank might have. His testimony was entered into the investigation file. Federal agencies ramped up scrutiny. The Office of the Comptroller of the Currency announced a joint probe with the Department of Justice. Subpoenas were issued for all internal communications from the day of the incident, plus 5 years of discrimination complaints. The House Committee on Financial Services scheduled a hearing summoning bank CEOs, advocates, and Elijah himself to testify. Chairwoman Lisa Parker addressed the press. Banking access is a civil rights issue. What happened to Elijah Reed is unacceptable, but it's not new. It's just visible now. C-SPAN began running special coverage. Banking While Black, a congressional reckoning. News anchors debated the possibility of new regulations, anonymous reporting, and third-party audits of all banks receiving federal insurance. The entire industry braced for impact. Meanwhile, in Elijah's city, community leaders gathered at the local civic center. Pastors, teachers, nonprofit heads, and young activists packed a long table, strategizing how to keep momentum alive. Latoya led the meeting. It's not enough for them to apologize. We want to see numbers, data, policy. This is a moment, but we can make it a movement. A teacher stood. Let's use this in the classroom, have our students research financial access, interview elders about their banking experiences, create art projects, make the system real. A retired banker admitted, "We trained to flag certain risk factors, but everyone knew what that meant. We need new training, new hiring, new oversight." The group formed working groups, one for policy, one for storytelling, one for youth engagement, and one for legal action. They resolved to hold monthly town halls and to publish their own report on racial bias in local banking. That night, Elijah went to dinner at his parents' house. The smell of cornbread and greens filled the air. Denise hugged him hard. Harold clasped his shoulder. They sat at the table, Elijah's sister Robin joining by phone from Atlanta. Over dinner, Denise asked, "Did you ever think this would happen?" Elijah shook his head. "I always hoped we'd reach a moment like this. I just didn't want it to be me in the middle of it." Robin's voice came through the speaker. "You're making a difference, Eli. My students are talking about you." Harold, voice rough but steady, said, "This is bigger than us. Our family's seen banks deny us for generations, mortgages, business loans, you name it. You're fighting for all of us now." Elijah was quiet. "I know, Dad. That's why I can't take a settlement or just let this fade. The whole world needs to see what really happens behind those counters." Later, he stepped out onto the porch, looking out over the city lights. He recorded a new voice memo, part habit, part therapy. Thursday, 9:38 p.m. Today, I saw what happens when the whole world pays attention. Tomorrow, I testify before Congress. I'm ready. Friday dawned with a gray sky. Elijah arrived at the federal courthouse in a navy suit, white shirt, and deep red tie. Dana met him at the steps, offering a quick rundown. Inside, the hearing room was packed. Journalists, lawyers, members of Congress, even a few familiar faces from the protests. Cameras flashed as he took his seat. Chairwoman Parker opened. "Governor Reed, thank you for joining us. Tell us, in your own words, what happened at Newfield Bank." Elijah spoke, voice steady. "I did everything right, provided every document. I was doubted, denied, and nearly arrested. I wasn't the first, and I won't be the last unless things change." He recounted the incident, the aftermath, the flood of similar stories that followed. He outlined policy recommendations. Mandatory anti-bias training for all bank staff, not just tellers. anonymous reporting systems for discrimination with federal oversight, quarterly publication of data on refused transactions broken down by race and region, a community advisory board at every federally insured bank. He ended, "This isn't about one bank. It's about a system that needs to rebuild trust, one policy, one customer at a time." Congressional questions followed, some supportive, some skeptical, all televised. Elijah answered them all, calmly, with data and dignity. After the hearing, LaToya and community leaders met Elijah outside, hugging him, holding signs, taking photos. Media outlets beamed out sound bites across the nation. Within days, the banking industry's largest trade association announced a partnership with the NAACP and National Urban League to eradicate bias and restore trust. Dozens of banks pledged to implement anonymous reporting, regular audits, and new hiring practices. The Federal Reserve published a toolkit for identifying and combating systemic bias, co-authored by Elijah, LaToya, and a panel of experts. CNN aired a primetime special, Access Denied, America's Banking Bias Exposed, hosted by Dana Mitchell. It featured not just Elijah's story, but dozens of others, shining a spotlight on what had been hidden for decades. Newfield Bank's board met to finalize their internal report. Scott Miller was officially terminated, Emily Davis placed on permanent leave with mandatory bias retraining. The bank released a public apology, signed by CEO Philip Bradford, acknowledging systemic shortcomings and pledging $5 million to community banking initiatives. Elijah, for his part, declined every settlement offer. He published an open letter. Apologies are words. Change is action. The real settlement is a world where no one is ever denied their dignity. By month's end, the ripple effects were clear. Reports of discriminatory refusals dropped 41% at Newfield branches. Anonymous reporting systems saw heavy use across the industry. Federal agencies rolled out new compliance checks. Community coalitions met with banks to review policy. Classroom curricula began to include units on financial equity. Elijah finally took a breath. He visited a local school, standing in front of a classroom of 7th graders, answering their questions about banks, power, and standing up for what's right. One girl raised her hand. "Were you scared?" Elijah smiled. "Sometimes, but I knew that speaking up was more important than being comfortable. If we want a better world, sometimes we have to make people uncomfortable." Afterward, a boy handed him a crayon drawing. It showed Elijah, fist raised, standing in front of a bank with the words, "We belong." He kept the drawing in his wallet. Over the coming weeks, stories kept coming. Letters, emails, tweets, calls. Some were angry, some hopeful, most just grateful. Elijah's testimony became a case study at law schools, business schools, and police academies. Colleges invited him to speak about banking, bias, and the power of one moment to spark change. The Federal Reserve's board, moved by his advocacy, created a permanent Office of Equity and Inclusion, staffed by regulators and community activists, tasked with monitoring compliance, collecting stories, and recommending new laws. Dana Mitchell of CNN ran follow-ups for months. Dana Mitchell, always professional, called Elijah's approach the gold standard for using one's platform to drive systems change. 1 year later, at a national banking conference, Elijah took the stage, no longer just the youngest Federal Reserve governor, but the face of a movement. He spoke quietly, powerfully. Every customer deserves dignity. Every dollar deserves respect. The arc of justice bends not by chance, but by choice. Elijah Reed's story didn't just change a bank. It changed the rules. His calm courage, the solidarity of witnesses like LaToya, the resolve of his family, and the voices of countless ordinary people made visible what too many had been forced to endure in silence. He knew the fight wasn't over, but as he walked out of the conference hall into the sunlight, greeted by activists, bankers, teachers, and children, he felt something new, hope rooted in action, in system, in the simple, unstoppable truth that dignity was not up for debate. The world for once seemed ready to listen. It began, as all storms do, with a single drop, then another and another. By late spring, the incident at Newfield Bank and Trust had become more than a trending hashtag, more than a headline. It was a movement. Elijah Reed rose each morning before sunrise, his mind bracing for the deluge. Emails, voicemails, texts, meeting reminders, calls from mayors, policy staffers, students, and community leaders. He'd become, not by choice but by necessity, a symbol, the face of a national reckoning in banking. He was recognized everywhere now, on the train, at restaurants, even in the hallways of the Federal Reserve. Reporters trailed him, activists greeted him, and ordinary people approached just to shake his hand. His apartment was no longer just home, but mission control. Whiteboards covered 2 walls covered in lists, pending legislation, regulatory deadlines, community roundtables. A separate board tracked stories people had sent him. Dozens of names, ages, cities, a quiet ledger of lives marked by the same brush of suspicion, the same doors closed. On a Thursday in May, he opened an email from a woman in Alabama. "Dear Mr. Reed, my grandfather was denied a farm loan in 1977. My son was denied a mortgage in 2019. Your fight is our fight. Don't let them wear you down." He replied to every letter, or at least as many as he could. "Thank you for sharing your story. You are not alone." Dana, his public affairs partner at the Fed, visited 3 times a week now. She brought updates, press clippings, security briefings. She reminded him to eat, to rest, to let his family in. They worked through the Impact File, a document now hundreds of pages long, tracking everything sparked by that one day at Newfield. 13 major banks had launched anonymous reporting platforms for bias and discrimination. 2 federal bills were working through committee, one mandating anti-bias training, another requiring annual data disclosure. 23 state attorneys general had opened reviews of banking discrimination. 5 banks had established advisory boards with real community power. One national banking chain, Capital Union, had fired 3 executives for retaliation against whistleblowers. In a single month, reported banking bias cases fell by 1/3 in the city. In some neighborhoods where generations had felt frozen out, new accounts opened in record numbers. But the change was not painless. For every message of support, there were 3 of anger, of resentment. Elijah's face had appeared on cable news, late-night comedy, and podcasts. He was praised as a hero and mocked as a troublemaker. On social media, bots and trolls flooded his mentions. "Maybe if you people learned how banks work, you wouldn't need special treatment. This is just more woke garbage. You're destroying trust. Go back where you came from." Elijah archived the hate. He refused to let it shape him, but even so it seeped in. He saw it in the way his shoulders tensed, in the exhaustion that clung to him at night. Dana watched, worried. "You need a break, Elijah." He shook his head. "Not yet. Not while they're still fighting us in committee, not while people still get denied." His parents called every night. Denise prayed for him. Harold offered wisdom in his own gruff way. "You're a Reed, son. You bend, but you don't break." Robin, his sister, called from Atlanta. "Don't let them make you a martyr, Eli. We need you here, not just as a symbol." He promised to be careful. The Newfield scandal forced banks everywhere to look inward. At a summit in Washington, D.C., Elijah addressed hundreds of executives, most of whom had never seen a Federal Reserve governor so young, so black, so adamant. He stood at the podium, suit immaculate, voice unwavering. "Banking is not just about numbers, it's about trust, and you have lost ours, not by accident, but by design. This is your chance to fix it." A silence swept the room. Some executives bristled, others nodded. A few took notes. The old way of doing things was over, and they knew it. A CEO of a regional bank approached him after. "We've always had diversity policies, but they never really changed anything. What do we do?" Elijah replied, "Start with your data. If you're not measuring, you're not fixing. Listen to your customers. Listen to your staff, especially the ones you've ignored." He left the summit with more invitations, some genuine, others for show. He accepted only those willing to make real change. Back in Newfield, Emily Davis, the teller, had become infamous. Her name and image appeared on message boards and news clips. She was suspended, then fired, her record marked by one day's mistake. She received threats, calls, emails, people at her door. She sought therapy, joined a support group for people canceled in the digital age. In her journal, she wrote, "I didn't see what I was doing. Now I see it everywhere." Scott Miller, the manager, had resigned. The bank offered him a settlement, a promise not to speak to the press. He moved away quietly, taking a job in compliance at a small finance firm. He lived with regret. He'd always thought himself fair. He'd never called himself racist. Now he spent sleepless nights reliving every small choice, every time he'd let a stereotype shape his decisions. Derek Hayes, the security guard, stayed. He became a quiet legend. People in the community thanked him for his calm, for not escalating. He was offered a job on the new advisory board at Newfield, charged with bringing community concerns to the executives' table. He accepted but warned, "If you want my voice, you better listen this time." LaToya Freeman, now a full-time advocate, led town halls in neighborhoods all over the city. She created a digital hub, Banking Justice, where people shared stories, got legal advice, and organized for change. At one meeting, an elderly man stood up. "They told me for 50 years I wasn't the right kind of customer. Now they're asking for my opinion." LaToya smiled. That's how we win, when they have to ask and listen. Community groups launched credit unions, taught financial literacy, and pressured banks for small business lending in Black and Latino neighborhoods. At rallies, they chanted Elijah's name, but also their own. Justice for Darnell. Justice for Maria. Justice for all. Elijah attended as many meetings as he could, slipping in quietly, taking notes, encouraging others to lead. "This can't be about one man," he said again and again. "It has to be all of us." In Congress, the Banking Bias Accountability Act crawled through committee. Lawmakers squabbled, some calling it common sense, others overreach. The banking lobby, always powerful, spent millions on ads, mailers, and lobbying. But public opinion had shifted. Voters flooded congressional offices with calls, letters, and visits. "We want change. We want accountability." Testimony after testimony poured in. Farmers denied loans. Small business owners refused service. Grandmothers told they were suspicious. The stories built pressure. The votes shifted. The bill passed the House, then the Senate. Then, with a flourish of pens, the president's desk. It required every federally insured bank to publish quarterly data on service denials, broken down by race, gender, and geography. It created an independent ombudsman for customer complaints. It funded financial education in low-income communities. CNN aired a special as the law was signed. Dana Mitchell, the anchor, looked directly into the camera. This all began with a single check, a single refusal. Change is possible, but only when people demand it. Elijah's days grew longer, his circle tighter. He traveled constantly, speaking to banks, lawmakers, universities. He testified before regulatory agencies, served on commissions, advised on new training modules. But the pressure grew. He missed birthdays, weddings, quiet dinners. Denise worried for his health. Harold reminded him to take care of the roots, not just the branches. He started therapy, admitting at last the toll. "It's hard to be a symbol," he told the therapist. "It's lonely. Sometimes I wish I could be anonymous again." His therapist replied, "Symbols are important, but you're still human. Make space for yourself." He tried, running in the mornings, calling Robin just to laugh, visiting his parents without talking about policy. He found joy in small things, a good meal, a sunny day, a child's drawing sent to him by a teacher. After months of organizing, policy-making, and scrutiny, Newfield Bank and Trust unveiled a new slate of changes. Their CEO, flanked by Derek Hayes and LaToya Freeman, announced, "Anonymous, third-party reporting for all discrimination complaints. Quarterly data on all service denials, published publicly. A standing community advisory board with budget authority. Financial literacy courses offered in local schools and churches. reparative grants for those denied service due to bias. Elijah was invited to speak at the press conference. He declined the spotlight, sending a statement instead. Justice is not a moment, it is a practice. This is a beginning, not an end. Derek addressed the crowd. I've watched this system from the inside and outside. I can tell you, change is hard, but it's possible. We're holding them accountable. You can too. LaToya called for vigilance. Don't let up. If you see bias, say something. If you're denied, document it. We are our own best advocates. The press coverage was overwhelming. Editorials praised Newfield but warned of accountability theater. Activists debated online. Was it enough or just a start? Had real change happened, or was this another temporary fix? In cities across the country, other banks scrambled to match Newfield's reforms. Some went further, offering low-interest loans to first-time homeowners of color, diversifying their boards, or funding legal clinics. The movement expanded beyond banks. Insurance companies reviewed their claims processes. Utility companies launched anti-bias training. Tech firms partnered with community colleges for job pathways. Elijah worked behind the scenes, meeting with CEOs, strategists, and activists. He called for the dignity audit, a process for any company serving the public to review how it treats its most vulnerable customers. Universities added his case to ethics and business courses. Professors cited it as a defining moment in corporate social responsibility. Elijah made a point to lift up stories beyond his own. At conferences, he shared letters. An immigrant denied a savings account, a black entrepreneur given higher interest rates, an elderly Latina who kept her money in cash for fear of humiliation. He told the story of a teenager, Malik, who watched his grandmother cry after being called a fraud. He's now a student at Morehouse, studying finance, determined to open his own bank. He read from an essay by a fifth grader. Mr. Reed, thank you for making it so my mom can buy our house. She says you are like a superhero, but I think you are like us. He ended each speech with the same words. Dignity is a right, not a privilege. Demand it, protect it, offer it to others. One autumn morning, Elijah walked into Newfield Bank's main branch for the first time since the incident. The staff greeted him, some nervously, others warmly. LaToya met him at the door, and Derek shook his hand. He made a small deposit, a check from speaking at a local school. The teller, a young man named Brandon, processed it efficiently with a smile. As Elijah left, Brandon called out, "Thank you, sir, for making it better." Elijah smiled. "Just doing my part." Outside, he found his parents waiting, beaming. Denise hugged him. "You did it, baby." Harold, ever stoic, managed a rare tear. "Proud of you, son." They walked down the street together, passing a mural, Elijah's face, surrounded by the words, "We belong." By winter, the impact was everywhere. Other industries followed suit. Airlines, hospitals, even government offices implemented dignity audits. Nonprofits published annual justice scorecards. Companies recruited community liaisons. Elijah was offered awards, book deals, TV specials. He declined most, preferring work to fame. He joined a working group at the White House, shaping the next generation of civil rights enforcement. He advised city councils on fair housing, partnered with schools to expand economic education, and helped found a new financial cooperative for underserved communities. In every speech, he stressed collective power. It's never just one person, it's all of us, standing together, refusing to be silenced or shamed. He reconnected with old friends, made new ones. He dated, tentatively at first, wary of ulterior motives. He found laughter, trust, and eventually, love. At home, he found peace in music, in cooking, in nights spent with family and close friends. He took Robin's advice, finding ways to be Elijah the man, not just Elijah the symbol. Years later, when the Newfield incident was cited in textbooks and boardrooms, when the name Elijah Reed came up in case studies, he always pointed the spotlight back to the people. LaToya, Derek, his parents, the thousands who shared their stories, the millions who demanded better. He knew the work would never truly be done, but the world had moved, if only an inch, closer to dignity for all. And all because, one Tuesday morning, a check was refused, a man stood his ground, and a nation decided to listen. Prologue, 2 years later. Spring came early, the city humming with renewal. On a crisp morning in March, sunlight spilled across the domed rotunda of the Federal Reserve's Washington headquarters. Crowds gathered, reporters clustered on the marble steps, and inside, a new class of junior regulators prepared for orientation. A giant banner hung above the main auditorium. Dignity in banking, lessons, struggles, progress. Elijah Reed adjusted his tie, smoothed his jacket, and stood quietly at the threshold. The faces in the crowd were young, eager, and, finally, diverse. He took in the moment, knowing that every one of these rising professionals had grown up with his story as common knowledge, as a turning point. He stepped to the podium, heart steady. "Good morning," he began. "I know you've all read the case files. You know the numbers. You've seen the documentaries. But let me tell you, behind every policy, every protest, every statistic is a person who decided to speak up. You may find yourself in that position one day. If you do, don't look away. Don't settle for less." The auditorium was silent, but the silence was electric. Elijah smiled, gestured to the row of community advocates in the front, Latoya, Derek, and others. "Today, you are the system. You get to decide whether it bends toward dignity or back toward the old ways. Make it count." As applause swelled, Elijah stepped aside, nodding at the next speaker, a young black woman, barely out of grad school, whose research on anonymous reporting had become a national template. Elijah listened, proud. The movement was no longer just his. It belonged to a new generation. The changes that had begun with Elijah's stand did not end with him. They traveled, branching and deepening, touching every part of the country, and sometimes beyond. The passage of the Banking Bias Accountability Act had forced transparency into the very bones of American finance. Quarterly reports now poured into federal offices from thousands of branches, each documenting the who, what, when, and why of every major customer refusal. The first year's data was sobering. Black and Latino customers were still twice as likely to have checks held for review, though numbers were trending down. Denials for suspicious activity dropped by 34% in urban areas. Anonymous complaints quadrupled, revealing patterns long hidden, but more than numbers changed. Bank branches in Atlanta, Chicago, Houston, Oakland, and dozens of smaller cities adopted real community advisory boards. These weren't symbolic. Budgets, hiring, policy reviews, and even marketing campaigns were now shaped by everyday people, teachers, small business owners, elders, young activists. The language of dignity was woven into staff handbooks and performance reviews. When a scandal broke at a regional bank in New Jersey, caught refusing mortgages to Asian American applicants, the response was swift: public audits, terminations, real restitution. The blueprint was Elijah's story, but the voices making change were many. Elijah received emails weekly from strangers. "Thank you. They listened to me this time. My daughter got her loan. She'll be the first in our family to own a home. We started our bakery. The bank manager shook my hand and apologized for the past." Not every story was a victory. Some recounted new forms of gatekeeping, new hurdles. Elijah answered every letter with the same reminder: the fight isn't over, but you aren't fighting alone. Latoya's digital hub, Banking Justice, now reached millions. It offered resources in multiple languages, connected whistleblowers with lawyers, published annual justice reports on every major bank, and hosted weekly live streams. Some featured Elijah. Others were led by new faces, young women, immigrants, elders who'd never set foot in a boardroom until now. Latoya traveled the country, speaking at schools, credit unions, even a tribal bank on the Navajo Nation. She insisted, "We aren't waiting for heroes. We're becoming the leaders we needed." Her story, once a footnote in Elijah's saga, became a guide for grassroots empowerment. Local bank watchdogs sprang up in dozens of cities, training citizens to monitor, document, and organize for justice. In Detroit, A group of high schoolers successfully lobbied their credit union to end minimum balance fees. In Mississippi, a retired school teacher led a campaign to bring internet banking to rural Black communities. In Los Angeles, banking advocates worked with formerly incarcerated people to secure fair loans for re-entry. The message was clear: systemic change needed both law and community will. In the months and years following the scandal, banking as a profession changed. Recruiters targeted HBCUs, community colleges, tribal schools, and historically underserved universities. Employee training went far beyond compliance. It was about bias, power, and listening. One flagship bank created dignity drills, immersive simulations designed by social psychologists and community partners. Annual bonuses for executives were now tied in part to equity metrics. Staff who reported bias or suggested reforms received public recognition. Derek, once a security guard, now sat on the national board of the Community Banking Trust. He trained security staff across the country, teaching them de-escalation, implicit bias, and the ethics of real customer care. "There's no substitute for seeing the human first," he told every new class, "and no excuse for not doing it." Banks that failed to keep up, who backslid into old habits, found themselves exposed by viral videos, independent audits, and community boycotts. Market share shifted. The cost of silence became too high. Shonda Riley, the civil rights attorney, became a fixture on news programs and congressional panels. She led a class action suit that forced several banks to pay restitution to thousands of wronged customers. The court ordered not just money, but policy reforms, independent monitors, and a 5-year transparency plan. The ripple hit credit bureaus, payday lenders, and mortgage companies. New regulations required them to collect and publish their own equity data. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau created a dignity hotline for banking complaints, fielding tens of thousands of calls each month. Other sectors took notice. Airlines, hospitals, tech companies, and schools began running their own dignity audits, often led by people inspired by Elijah and Latoya. Journalists from Canada, the UK, Brazil, and Ghana contacted Elijah, studying how American activism changed entrenched systems. Several international banks reached out, seeking advice. A delegation from South Africa invited Latoya to help design their own reporting system, saying, "Your story is our story too." A scholar from Jamaica emailed Elijah, "Colonial banks taught us to distrust our own. Your reforms remind us we can write our own future." But for Elijah, the greatest changes were quieter, closer to home. He learned to set boundaries. After 2 years of constant travel, he took a sabbatical. He spent weeks with Denise and Harold, helping Harold fix up the old house, learning recipes from Denise, and finally taking Robin up on her offer to join a family reunion in Atlanta. He went for long runs without his phone, ate dinners where no one talked politics, and took up painting, mostly landscapes, mostly for himself. He stayed in touch with Dana, who remained his trusted partner in advocacy. They laughed about the endless press releases, the small victories, the work left undone. He built new relationships. One in particular deepened into love. She was a public defender, sharp, funny, unafraid to challenge him. They took long walks through the city, talking about dreams, fears, futures. She grounded him, reminded him he was still a person, not just a movement. They planned a small wedding, determined to keep it private. When word leaked, the media respected their wishes. Even symbols are allowed to be human, at least sometimes. Elijah mentored dozens of young people, especially those who'd grown up in the aftermath of his fight. Interns at the Fed, students at local colleges, young advocates from banking justice. He never gave speeches about himself, always about the work, the principles, the power of community. He visited high schools, spoke at graduations. At one, a senior stood up and asked, "How do you keep going when the system still feels so big?" Elijah smiled. "You keep going because you see the difference. Every story, every new policy, every changed life, that's the system shifting. It's slow sometimes, but it's real." He stayed late, taking pictures, signing programs, listening to dreams. LaToya and Derek were often at his side. Sometimes all three were invited as a team, a living reminder that change takes many hands. Years after Newfield, a movie was made about the incident. Not a drama, but a docu-series, combining reenactment, interviews, and real footage. Elijah and LaToya served as consultants, ensuring accuracy, giving voice to those rarely heard. The series won awards, sparked new conversations, and found its way into school curricula. Teachers used it to launch discussions about power, fairness, and responsibility. One episode centered on the voices that didn't go viral, the hundreds of people whose stories, once hidden, now shaped public debate. Elijah watched the series with his parents, his partner, and close friends. Denise cried. Harold nodded silently. Robin called from Atlanta after every episode. You did it, Eli, she said. You changed the story. He reminded her, as always, we all did. The law bearing his name, the Reed Act, became a standard for anti-discrimination efforts. It was cited in Supreme Court cases, debated in state legislatures, even referenced by international human rights groups. Years later, a senator introduced an amendment to expand the Reed Act to digital banking and fintech companies. Elijah testified, as always, calmly, relentlessly. The platforms may change, he said, but dignity is timeless. Justice is not technology dependent. Despite all progress, not every battle was won. Banks still tried to skirt the rules. Some trained staff to avoid overt denials, but quietly found new ways to gatekeep. Elijah's inbox filled with new stories, sometimes familiar, sometimes innovative in their injustice. He pressed regulators, held town halls, wrote op-eds. He reminded everyone that vigilance is the price of progress. LaToya's team at Banking Justice uncovered a new scandal at a digital bank, and together they forced another round of reforms. At every setback, Elijah reminded the movement, we didn't win everything, but we changed the map. Now, when injustice happens, it can't hide. Personal reflections. In his home office, Elijah kept a memory wall, photos, letters, hand-drawn cards from children, newspaper clippings. One letter, framed in the center, read, You stood up, and so did we. My father always said, don't make waves. Now he says, swim for the shore. Thank you for giving us the courage. He wrote back, the shore is closer because you swam with me. He never forgot the faces of those lost along the way, customers who died before seeing justice, tellers fired without support, advocates who burned out. At every speech, he called their names, honored their struggle. He insisted, we are only as strong as the stories we carry. At a family reunion, Denise announced, this year, our family owns more homes than ever. More kids in college, more businesses started. We're not just surviving, we're thriving. Harold raised a glass. To Elijah, to Robin, to all of us. Robin beamed. To dignity, to never backing down. Elijah, for once, was speechless. He felt the weight and wonder of what they'd built, together as a family, a community, a country inching toward its promise. On the second anniversary of the Newfield incident, Elijah returned to the same branch. The lobby was different. Diverse staff, art on the walls, pamphlets about financial rights. He walked to the counter. The teller, a young Latina named Isabel, smiled. Mr. Reed, it's an honor. How can I help you? He handed her a check, donation for a youth scholarship fund. As she processed it, LaToya and Derek entered. The three stood together, smiling, remembering. A group of students watched from the door, whispering, that's him. A teacher encouraged them forward. Go ahead, ask your questions. One boy, nervous, said, is it true you almost gave up? Elijah knelt to meet his eyes. I thought about it, but every time I wanted to walk away, someone else needed me to stay. That's how we keep going. We stay for each other. The boy nodded, emboldened. I want to work at a bank one day, maybe even the Fed. Elijah smiled wide. You can, you should, and when you get there, make sure everyone feels like they belong. The teller finished his transaction. Thank you for everything, sir. Elijah turned to his friends, to the students, to the community. This isn't my victory, it's yours. Keep building, keep speaking, keep demanding more. As he walked out, the sun brightened the street, the mural still vivid on the brick wall outside. He saw his own face painted there, but also dozens of others. LaToya, Derek, anonymous faces, the faces of a movement. He took a breath, feeling the promise of spring, the power of dignity, the certainty that the work would continue, now and always, in every teller's window, every new account opened, every voice raised for justice. The system, once cold and distant, had learned to listen, and it would never be silent again.